The bound hearts, Reema and Asad's rekindled flame, the shadow of doubt. Asad stood in the balcony, the smoke of his cigarette swirling into the night air. Inside the room sat Reema, his bride of only a few months, 10 years his junior, an orphan, and innocent to the point of being painful. His sisters had chosen her from the village, believing a simple girl would be a submissive servant to the family. But Asad didn't want a servant. He wanted a companion, a woman who understood the fire of a man's needs. Reema, though young, was no fool. She saw the disappointment in Asad's eyes on their wedding night. She heard the whispers of her sisters-in-law, who began giving her classes on how to seduce her own husband. But every time she tried to act smart or bold, she fumbled, and Asad pushed her further away, eventually immersing himself in his work and his sophisticated business partner, Meher. The intruder. The tension reached a breaking point when Meher moved into their home, claiming a robbery had left her unsafe. Meher was everything Reema wasn't: bold, manipulative, and dressed in silk that clung to her curves. She openly flirted with Asad at the dining table, even trying to take Reema's chair. "This is my place," Reema had said firmly, her first spark of defiance. Though Asad scolded her, his mother stepped in to support Reema, but the battle had only just begun. That night, Reema found Asad in Meher's room. Meher had lured him there with lies of being scared, and Reema walked in to find Meher unbuttoning Asad's shirt. The confrontation was fierce. Reema dragged her husband away, but the seeds of poison were sown. Meher later showed Reema a doctored video of Asad confessing his love while intoxicated. Reema felt her world shatter, but instead of leaving, she chose to fight. The breaking point. The following day, Asad's sisters invited the family for dinner, but Asad called saying he would be late. Meher took this chance to drive Asad to a secluded spot after a meeting, once again trying to drug him. But this time, Asad had begun to see through the haze. He realized that while Meher offered excitement, she lacked the purity and genuine care that Reema showed every day. The way she served his parents, the way she stayed up waiting for him, and the way her eyes mirrored a soul that truly loved him. He arrived home late to find Reema transformed. She wasn't wearing the simple village clothes anymore. She was draped in a deep red sari, her hair flowing and her eyes red from crying but burning with a new intensity. The confrontation and the flame. Asad tried to apologize, but Reema stopped him. She took his tie and, in a moment of desperate passion and jealousy, tied his hands to the bedpost. "Reema, what is this?" Asad gasped, surprised by her sudden boldness. "You told me I was too young," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "You told me I didn't know how to be a woman. Today, I will show you that my heart belongs only to you, and I will die before I let another woman touch what is mine." Asad looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the woman she had become through the pain he had caused. He saw the Nuamish display of her beauty that she usually kept hidden just for him. As she leaned in, her lips grazing his, the age gap vanished. There was only the heat of two souls finally recognizing each other. "I'm sorry, Reema," Asad groaned, his voice thick with desire. "I was a fool to look for shadows when I had the sun right here." He broke free from the silk tie, not with force, but because Reema let him. He pulled her into a fierce embrace, his lips meeting hers in a way they never had before. It wasn't just physical, it was a promise. The cleanse. The next morning, Meher was waiting at the breakfast table, ready to play her next card. But Asad walked down with his arm firmly around Reema's waist. He didn't even look at Meher. "Meher, your husband called. He's back in town." "I've arranged a car to take you home immediately," Asad said coldly. "And my business lawyer will be handling our partnership from now on." "I realize now that some boundaries should never be crossed." Meher left in a fit of rage, but no one noticed. The happily ever after. Years passed. Reema completed her degree, becoming the smart, confident woman Asad always wanted. But she never lost her village heart. Asad became her biggest supporter, no longer seeing her as 10 years younger, but as his equal, his strength, and his greatest passion. They sat in the balcony where Asad used to smoke alone. Now he held Reema close, the desert stars shining above them. "Are you still thirsty for my attention, my king?" Reema teased, leaning her head on his shoulder. Asad kissed her forehead. "Every day, my queen. Every single day." Key elements added for the romantic tone. Emotional climax. Asad realizes Reema's worth through her loyalty versus Meher's manipulation. The tie scene. The Bound Hearts, Part 2, The Night of the Crimson Vow. The air in the bedroom was thick with the scent of jasmine and the unspoken tension of months. Asad sat on the edge of the bed, his head throbbing from the drink Meher had spiked. His vision was blurry, but as he looked up, he saw a version of Reema he had never seen before. Gone was the timid girl from the village who flinched at his shadow. Standing before him was a woman whose eyes burned with a possessive, dangerous fire. The confrontation. Reema stepped closer, the silk of her crimson sari rustling against the floor. She picked up Asad's silk tie, which he had discarded on the chair. "You think I am a child, Asad?" she whispered, her voice like velvet cutting through the silence. "You think because I am 10 years younger I do not feel the sting of your neglect? Or the poison of that woman's touch on your skin?" Asad tried to stand, his voice thick. "Reema, it's not what you think. Meher, she's just—" "Silence," Reema commanded. Before he could react, she pushed him back onto the pillows. With a swift, practiced motion, one she had practiced in her mind 1,000 times while crying alone, she looped his own silk tie around his wrists and secured them firmly to the mahogany bedpost. Asad gasped, the sudden restriction jolting his senses. "Reema! What are you doing?" "I am claiming what is mine," she breathed, leaning over him. Her hair fell like a silken curtain around his face, trapping him in her scent. "You told me to cover myself. You told me to hide my beauty. And yet, you let your eyes wander to a woman who wears her sins like a badge of honor. Tonight, you will not look at her. You will only look at me." The breaking of the wall. Asad looked at her, and for the first time, the 10-year gap between them vanished. He saw the strength in her jaw, the curves he had ignored out of a misplaced sense of protection, and the raw, unfiltered love that had turned into a desperate obsession. "I was protecting you, Reema," Asad groaned, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I thought you were too innocent for a man like me." "Innocence is not ignorance, Asad," she whispered, her lips grazing his ear, sending shivers down his spine. "I may be from the village, but I know how to hold on to my king. I have served your parents, I have cooked your meals, and I have prayed for your soul. But tonight, I am not your servant. I am your wife." She leaned in, her lips finally meeting his in a kiss that tasted of tears, salt, and a hunger that had been suppressed for too long. Asad's resistance crumbled instantly. He didn't struggle against the tie. He leaned into her, his soul finally finding the anchor it had been searching for in the cold, hollow city. The morning of truth. The sun rose over the city skyline, but the atmosphere in the house had shifted. Downstairs, Meher sat at the breakfast table, wearing a smug, victorious smile. She adjusted her hair, waiting for Reema to come down with packed bags, broken and defeated by the photos and videos Meher had planted. Instead, the sound of firm footsteps echoed on the stairs. Asad walked down, his shirt crisp, his expression unreadable. But he wasn't alone. Reema walked beside him, her hand tucked firmly into the crook of his arm. Her head was held high, a dark, bold bindi on her forehead, and her eyes sparkling with a newfound confidence. Meher's smile faltered. "Asad? I thought, after last night..." Asad pulled out a chair for Reema before turning to Meher. His voice was cold, like ice hitting a glass floor. "Meher, I've reviewed the business files from last night, and I've also reviewed the security footage from the hallway." He leaned over the table, his shadow looming over her. "You thought my wife was a child you could bully. You thought I was a man you could manipulate with a few drinks and cheap tricks. You were wrong on both counts." He signaled to the door. "Your husband is waiting outside. I've ended our partnership. My lawyers will send the final settlement. Do not ever step foot in this house or near my wife again. The eternal bond. Meher left in a storm of humiliation, her silk saris and city charms proving useless against a bond forged in true fire. As the door slammed shut, Asad turned to Reema. His parents looked on, smiling softly as they realized their simple village girl was exactly the strength their son needed. Asad took Reema's hands in his. I spent so long looking for a partner who understood my world, Reema. I didn't realize that the only world that matters is the one we build together. Reema smiled, a playful glint returning to her eyes. Does that mean I don't have to tie you up again tonight, Asad? Asad laughed, pulling her into a warm embrace, maybe just once more for old time's sake. In the heart of the noisy, fast-paced city, the man of 30 and the woman of 20 finally found their rhythm. The age gap was no longer a wall. It was a bridge that they crossed every day, hand in hand, bound by a love that was no longer silent. The Bound Hearts, Part 3, The Return of the Queen. 3 years had passed since the night the silk tie changed everything. The city apartment was no longer a cold, silent gallery of Asad's success. It was a home filled with the scent of sandalwood, the sound of laughter, and the steady hum of a marriage that had defied every expectation. Reema was no longer the frightened 17-year-old orphan who flinched at a shadow. She had completed her degree with honors, her village roots now blossoming into a sophisticated grace that even Asad's business rivals admired. But today, they weren't going to a corporate gala. They were heading back to the village. The arrival at the ancestral gates, Asad's sisters, the ones who had plotted to bring a submissive girl into the house, were waiting at the gates of the village manor. They expected to see the same timid Reema, perhaps a bit more polished, but still the girl they could dictate to. The black SUV pulled up, and Asad stepped out first. He looked younger, the stress lines on his face replaced by a calm, satisfied glow. He walked to the other side and opened the door, offering his hand with a reverence that made his sisters whisper in shock. Reema stepped out. She wore a hand-loomed silk sari of emerald green, her hair tied in a sleek, modern bun adorned with fresh jasmine. On her hip, she carried a 2-year-old boy with Asad's piercing eyes and Reema's soft, triumphant smile. "Reema?" the elder sister gasped, stepping forward. You look so different." Reema didn't lower her eyes. She smiled, a calm, regal expression. "The city changes people, Didi, but it only changes you into who you were always meant to be." The table turns. That evening, the family gathered on the traditional floor mats for dinner. The sisters began their usual routine of trying to give advice to Reema about how to handle the household. "You know, Reema," the younger sister started, "Asad is a busy man. You must make sure you don't bother him with your childish needs. Men in the city have many temptations." Asad, who was washing his hands, paused. He didn't wait for Reema to speak. He sat down beside her, placing a protective arm around her waist. "Temptations?" Asad laughed, his voice echoing in the courtyard. "My sisters, you gave me a gift I didn't deserve. You thought you were giving me a servant for our parents. Instead, you gave me a woman who saved my soul. There is no temptation in the world that can match the fire of my wife." The sisters fell silent, their faces turning a deep shade of red. They realized then that their plan had backfired in the most beautiful way. They had tried to control Asad's life, but instead, they had paved the way for a love so powerful it had stripped them of their influence. The midnight walk. Later that night, the village was quiet, save for the crickets and the distant sound of a flute. Reema and Asad walked toward the old peepal tree, where they had first had their nikah ceremony. "Do you ever miss that girl?" Asad asked, pulling her closer into the warmth of his shawl. "The one who was afraid of her own husband?" Reema leaned her head on his shoulder. "She had to die so this woman could live, Asad. But sometimes I remember the fear that I wasn't enough for you." Asad stopped walking and turned her to face him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of crimson silk. Reema gasped. It was the same tie she had used to bind him 3 years ago. "Why do you still have this?" she whispered. "Because it reminds me of the moment I truly woke up," Asad said, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. "It reminds me that love isn't about age or city lights. It's about the person who has the courage to tie you down when you're drifting away." The final vow, under the ancient tree, away from the prying eyes of the village and the noise of the city, Asad knelt down. He took Reema's hand, the one adorned with the heavy gold bangles he had bought her, and kissed her palm. "I am yours, Reema, not because of a family command, not because of a village custom, but because my heart refuses to beat for anyone else." Reema pulled him up, her eyes shimmering with tears of joy. "And I am yours, not as a shadow but as your light." They returned to the manor hand in hand. As they passed the sisters' room, they heard them arguing about their own husbands. Reema and Asad just shared a secret, knowing smile. They had survived the storms of jealousy, the walls of age, and the traps of the city. As they closed their door, the moon shone brightly over Tharkana and the city beyond, marking the end of a long journey. The village girl was now the undisputed queen of Asad's heart, and the city man was finally at peace. The Bound Hearts, Part 4, The Eternal Horizon, the conclusion. The village of Tharkana was bathed in the golden hues of a departing sun. For Asad and Reema, this trip was more than a homecoming. It was an exorcism of the ghosts that had haunted their early days. The sisters' whispers had been silenced by Reema's grace, and the shadow of Meher was nothing more than a faded memory in a distant city. The legacy of love. As the evening progressed, the village elders gathered in the courtyard. They looked at Reema, once the orphan girl they pitied, and saw a woman who carried the dignity of a queen. She sat with her mother-in-law, gently massaging her feet, proving that her education and city life hadn't stripped her of her values. It had only deepened them. Asad watched her from the balcony, the same place where he once stood alone and frustrated. Now his heart felt full. His father walked up beside him, placing a heavy, proud hand on his shoulder. "You were angry with us when we chose her, weren't you?" the old man asked, his voice raspy but kind. Asad smiled, a genuine, soft expression. "I was a fool, Abu. I thought I knew what I needed. I thought I needed a partner for my business. I didn't realize I needed a soul for my life." "She didn't just serve this family, Asad," his father whispered. "She united it. Look at your sisters." They finally stopped talking and started listening. The night of the silent promise, later that night, the village was enveloped in a profound silence. The heat of the day had vanished, replaced by a cool desert breeze. Reema walked out to the courtyard, where a traditional swing, jula, hung from an ancient neem tree. Asad followed her, his footsteps silent on the sand. He sat beside her, the swing creaking softly. He took her hand, the skin soft, yet the grip firm. "Do you remember what you said to me that night in the city?" Asad asked, his voice a low vibration in the night air. "When you tied my hands?" Reema blushed, the memory still sending a spark through her. "I said I would die before I let another woman touch what is mine." Asad pulled her closer, his lips brushing her forehead. "You didn't just save our marriage that night, Reema. You saved me from becoming a man who only cared about money and status. You taught me that passion is nothing without loyalty." The final vow. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, not a diamond from a city mall, but a raw, beautiful emerald, set in ancient silver, matching the color of the sari she wore today. "I gave you a wedding ring because I was told to," Asad said, sliding the ring onto her finger. "I am giving you this one because I want to. This is my promise that for the next 50 years, I will be the man you deserve. No more walls, no more age gaps. Just us." Reema leaned her head on his shoulder, tears of happiness shimmering in her eyes. "I don't need promises, Asad. I just need you to keep looking at me the way you are right now." The dawn of a new era. The next morning, as the SUV packed with luggage and gifts prepared to leave for the city, the entire village stood at the gates. The sisters-in-law, finally humbled, hugged Reema tightly, their eyes moist. They realized that the simple girl they tried to manipulate was the very person who had brought true honor to their family name. As the car drove away, disappearing into the vast horizon of the Thar Desert, Reema looked back at the village one last time. She was no longer the girl leaving her home in fear. She was a woman returning to her world in triumph. Asad accelerated, his hand resting firmly over Reema's on the gear shift. The road ahead was long, but they were no longer traveling different paths. They were one heart, one soul, and one eternal story.